Hello and welcome to the Underhive. We are back with some more How to Command the Death Guard. In this series, we're going to take a look at every aspect of the Death Guard. So whether you're looking to get more out of your army, or you're thinking of dipping a toe into Nurgle's crusty cauldron, then there's something here for you. In this episode, we're going to start our look at the stratagems phase by phase throughout a game playing as Death Guard. In this particular episode, we will be starting with the requisition stage before the game begins. So this is while you're building your list. So let's dive in and take a look at the requisition phase stratagems. Probably the best place to start would be the Nephilim changes to the way Warlord and Relic stratagems work, in that normally the Warlord trait and Relic would have been free in the past, but now you'll be paying for it. So of course, 1 CP stratagem to give your Warlord a Warlord trait, and 1 CP to give our character a Relic. Doesn't specifically have to be the Warlord, but it could be. So of course, you don't have to do this. Outside of Mortarion, in my opinion, I feel you have to pay the 1 CP to get his Warlord traits, because that is what he is. But Typhus, for example, you wouldn't have to. Everybody else, of course, doesn't have a baked-in Warlord trait, and you can pick whatever you want for them, as long as it lines up with the Plague Company, etc. So, although, yes, this is a deficit in the overall CP you'll have in a game, I don't mind it as a change, but I don't think it was needed. Either way, I still think with Death Guard, because you're really only going to run a battalion detachment most of the time in a 2,000 point game, you're not necessarily going to need to bring like a Vanguard or a Spearhead as well. You could, certainly, but I think that taking some Warlord traits, some relics, is probably a better bet. So I think most of the time you'll probably see people still use the Warlord trait and relic, despite it now costing you 2 of your initial 6 CP to do so. 1 for the Warlord trait, 1 for the relic. But besides that, of course, we've got some requisition stratagems in the codex itself. Now, I'm not going to go deep dive into all of these because we'll come back to some combos later down the line, but we are going to touch on them. So first and foremost, the Wretched Plague Company have their specific requisition stratagem to know 1 additional spell on a Psyker, and to be able to reroll 1 spell for that Psyker each psychic phase. So it adds a little bit more flexibility in terms of having more spells to pick from in any given situation, and a bit more consistency in that if you do fail a roll, you've got the opportunity to reroll without spending a command point. Now, certainly, if you end up re-rolling a failed spell into a past spell more than once in the game, then arguably it's paid for itself, because quite often getting that spell off will be important. It might not be the difference between winning and losing the game. It might have been the thing you'd have just gone, right, I'll wear that fail, is what it is. But particularly if you're avoiding perils as a result, that could be very important. So ultimately, it's not necessarily worth taking the Wretched Plague Company for, in my opinion. But if you are planning to go with the Wretched, I don't think it's a bad way to spend a CP, particularly on the key Psyker that's got the spells that you feel are a case of win or lose if they go off. Next up, we've got Gifts of Decay and Champions of Disease. They do a very similar thing. They're a way to dish out additional relics. Gifts of Decay goes on to characters. Champions of Disease goes on to squad champions. So Plague Marines, Death Shroud, and Blight Lords. So with those, you can, in a strike force, 2,000 point, you can use them twice each. So you could spend all 6 of your CP by taking a Warlord trait, a Relic, 2 on Gifts of Decay, and 2 on Champions of Disease. Now, I'm not suggesting that's a great idea. There aren't that many relics that are worth taking, but there certainly are some good ones. The standouts for me on Gift of Decay would be the Revolting Stench Vats for the Foul Blight Spawn. Very, very good upgrade. And also the Plague Skull of Glothilla, particularly if you're taking a relic from your Plague Company, then you wouldn't have otherwise taken the Plague Skull of Glothilla. It's a fantastic relic, quite easy to deal with a character that ends up within 6 inch of you. Your opponent's got an apothecary or some kind of psyker that's a force multiplier for their unit that wants to be on the front line as well. They've come in within 6, the end of the movement phase, Plague Skull. On average, you're going to get 3 or 4 mortal wounds, but you can do a lot better than that if you hit some 6s. And as a result, you could take out that character for 1 CP. That is value in anybody's book, I would imagine. I like to put that on through Champions of Disease, put it on the Plague Marines, try and make sure they don't get wiped before they get a chance to use that. So otherwise, you might prefer to put it on something a bit more durable like Terminators, or on a character if you prefer through Gifts of Decay. Next up, we've got Plague Chosen, which allows you to give characters additional Warlord traits. In a Strike Force mission, again, you can use it twice, so you could give out an additional 2 Warlord traits to your characters. But importantly, you cannot give an individual character more than 1 Warlord trait, and you cannot give out the same Warlord trait more than once. Now, in an open game or narrative game, your opponent might be willing to allow you to do that for some narrative reason, in which case that's perfectly fine. But of course, we're talking matched play here, where you can't do that. There are codexes out there that will allow you to have multiple Warlord traits on the same entity, character in most cases, but ultimately that isn't a thing for Death Guard. You can only have 1 each. The standouts for me there would be Arch-Contaminator on like a Biologish Putrefier, who's there to support mortal wound spam, or on the likes of a Foul Blightspawn, who again is there with the Revolting Stench Vats to be a denial of charges and a fight last effect on the front line. You could, of course, have him out on the wings, but I think he's in a really good position if he's on the front line. Really forces your opponent to make some difficult decisions if they want to engage in melee. And, of course, most armies have some melee propensity. Some are geared almost entirely to it. So having something like that on the board, very often it's going to do something, and very infrequently it'll do nothing. The last one there, probably not one you'll use much, is Grandfatherly Influence. It gives toughness and disgustingly resilient to Chaos Spawn. I don't think Chaos Spawn are worth taking to begin with, so I don't think they're worth this stratagem. The only reason I would run one is if I had the points left over and didn't have another model to use to fill up those points. But I don't own a Chaos Spawn model, so I'm never going to be in that position. If you are, fair enough, you can run them. I don't think it's worth doubling down on the CP. I think if you are using them, it's a fast unit to just get out into the mid-board, or relatively fast compared to the rest of the army anyway, to get out into the mid-board and just be a target for your opponent to shoot at, and just ask them a question of, are you going to leave this here? Besides that, I don't think they have any real utility or value in the Death Guard army, so I don't think you're spending CP on this stratagem. So as it goes, that's everything for the Requisition Phase. There's not a lot of decisions to make besides, do you want the CP for stuff in the game, or do you feel you'll get more value from some relics and Warlord traits to begin with? For myself, I will generally spend 3 or 4 CP on these stratagems. Generally will take at least 1 Warlord trait, if not 2, and at least 1 relic, if not 2. Generally, I'll gear towards 2 relics and 1 Warlord trait, but sometimes 2 of each, because for me, I like taking Ferric Blight. I also like Gloaming Blow if you go in 2nd or 3rd Plague Company. The relic that's associated with those Plague Companies are both really good on a Demon Prince. Healing Demon Engines is awesome, particularly because I run 2 Bloat Drones and 3 Plague Burst Crawlers. 3 Blight Haulers, but even if you're not running that exact loadout, you might have a Plague Burst Crawler or something. Particularly the Plague Burst Crawler benefits because it brackets, so tipping it back above the next bracket is always going to be great because that's improving its ballistic skill. So anyway up, I like those Warlord traits and those relics. Warp Insect Hive is really good as well, full rerolls in melee. But beyond that, as I've mentioned, I really like the Plague Skull of Glythilla, always worth consideration. The Revolting Stench Vats is great if you're taking the Blightspawn, and Arch Contaminator can be a really good force multiplier for a variety of Fetid Virion, but it's really good on the Blightspawn, which I think now doesn't become an auto-include, but it becomes very close to that. So I think you'll probably see most Death Guard players spending 2 to 4 CP, maybe more, at the beginning of the game on these Requisition Phase stratagems, but I do not think in any case that will be the Wretched stratagem or the Chaos Spawn stratagem, because they're just nowhere near as powerful as the effects you're getting from Warlord traits and relics. And I don't think you'd want to go out of your way to spend the whole 6, because as we'll see in the coming videos, there are a variety of powerful stratagems that you may wish to use in the early turns, and if you spend all 6 CP at the beginning, it's really going to limit your opportunity to do that. Outside of having a talisman, in which case you could generate more CP and maybe be able to have the best of both worlds. So that is something to be said. If you bring in a talisman, you can afford to go that bit deeper, because you've got more than a 50-50 of him generating a command point each turn in the command phase. Well, that's everything for the Requisition Phase. Let me know what you think. What sort of relics, Warlord traits, or do you use the other stratagems maybe? But what sort of relics and Warlord traits do you like to bring, and who do you like to give them to? I'll get back to you in the comments. So thank you very much for getting involved if you do. But otherwise, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time in the Underhive.